I mean, all of it's pretty much just straightforward. I feel like how we discuss this will be important because, like, I don't really remember anything from old Scott Pilgrim.
Oh,
So,
okay.
like, this is like,
Oh, I got you covered, brother. Don't you
but
worry
but but
about
like,
that.
yeah, I think we can just start chatting.
Hello and welcome to Add It to the List, the show where we binge watch a season of an anime and then talk about whether or not we think it should go on your watch list. My name is Jack, and with me as always is Forrest.
Hello.
And today, beware spoilers for the first season of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. What was your experience with the Scott Pilgrim franchise before watching this?
I saw the movie back in high school, I think. I watched it with someone, just like one of my high school friends. Honestly, can't remember who anymore. But I remembered it vaguely. I honestly don't remember how it ends, like, at all. I just remember the characters for the most part. Remember some sequences. I feel like the main sequences I've seen are ones that I've seen in clips throughout the years, like the band scene or like some of the fights. But yeah, so honestly, I was going into this like 90% blind, I feel like, because I don't have any of the context from the original comic. I basically just knew who the characters were, and that's like it. So,
Fair enough.
what about you?
Whew! Hey, boy! See? I love it. Scott Pilgrim is one of the franchises that, in addition to being near and dear to my heart, probably it's very formative as well. I'd seen the movie first in theaters like the weekend it came out, and I was young enough at the time that I was a little disappointed because it was like sold as an action film, and what it is a story about relationships, right? And action happens.
Was that your first interaction with it? Yeah. Okay.
And then I read the comic books, and then a couple years passed, and a coworker of mine at the group home, it was also one of his favorite series, and he just had all of them in color, and so I rewatched them, or I reread them again, and I'm like, why don't I own this? But like every year since I was 20, I've rewatched the movie on my birthday while getting drunk, because there's something very prevalent about the story of a post-college 20-something learning to move on with his life that
Yeah.
I found I really enjoyed. And every year I notice something different, or I feel a different way about things, because like I am now older than Scott ends up even in the comics. Like Scott's at his oldest in the comics because he starts off older, because in the movie they're like, all right, Knives is 17, and it is objective. Like the point is that it's weird that Scott's dating this girl, but it's still weird that Scott's dating this girl. So rather than 23, I want to 20, depending on which iteration, he's either 23, 22, or 21. Right. And then at least, or not at least, about a year goes by over the course of the comics, because like he's in his relationship with Ramona for long enough for them to hit kind of like a slump, and like we see some stuff go on there. So going into Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, I had nothing but hope and expectation in equal levels, because when I heard the first announcements that they were doing this, what I had originally wanted was just an animated version of the comic book, because you can do that. But I'm not upset with what we got. That being said, if you are a big fan of Scott Pilgrim, the first episode is kind of hard to watch.
Interesting.
And maybe it's just me, but there are a lot of iconic moments, there are a lot of iconic scenes that are just a little wrong. Like, some jokes are different, some dialogue accomplishes the same thing but is said differently, and like, so now there's an awkward third version of these scenes, because one of the things that the movie did very well is all of the iconic scenes are there up to the point of divergence. And in the movie, it diverts from the comic books after Todd. It diverts pretty heavily. Who's Ramona's third evil ex.
Yeah, bro, I really need to read the comic book.
And that's because the movie got greenlit before Brian Lee O'Malley, I believe, finished. That's the story I understand, is he wasn't done with the comics by the time they had started like wanting to make the movie.
Wait, so how was the comic published? Was it like published as books, or was it published?
It was published as 7 like comic books. Like
Well, I guess like when it was released, was he releasing it online prior to it being published? Oh, okay.
It was like printed
Okay,
stuff.
yeah. Was it in black and white, or was it?
Originally, it was in black and white. In black and white, and there's actually a very funny joke where after Ramona changes her hair during the relationship, Scott goes, "Oh, is that your natural color?" And Ramona looks at her hair and goes, "I don't know." And in like the colored version, it's like a green or something. It's very obviously not a natural color. And so there's a little like editor's note next to her that just says, "This joke was funnier in black and white." And it's so, I mean,
Yeah, that's good.
that is the funniest part of the joke.
When was it printed in color then?
Gosh, 2012 maybe? I don't know.
Like they just kind of did it like a re-release.
Well, once it got
Big.
right? Like once it became a global thing, once it got its own Michael Cera movie, like, come on.
I feel like there's a lot of history to the story that I just don't know, but like I'll be asking questions.
The divergence point for the Netflix show Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is at the end of the first episode. And up to that point, things are just sort of like in an uncanny valley of like, oh, this is how this goes, but not. More or less to the same point. But what I found interesting is they did a little bit of cleaning up of the scenes that made Scott less of an asshole. Like, there are just lines that he says, or like jokes that he makes, or just like moments where he's more of a person and less of a self-destructive asshole who's making it everybody else's fault. I hate Scott. I hate Scott Pilgrim. But we hate in others what we recognize in ourselves, right? And so, like, all of the, like, I have an uncommonly negative opinion of the character of Scott Pilgrim. So one of the reasons, there's one of the few things that I don't like about the movie is that Michael Cera is such a dopey, lovable kind of actor that he makes you like Scott more.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in this he's pretty likable. At least for me. I mean, like, he is, like you were just saying, like they do kind of tone it down a little bit as far as it seems, but I think I laughed a lot at his character, and like, yeah, he's not like a great person per se. Like I mean, like, I feel like that's the whole point, but I definitely didn't feel that he was an asshole in this, as much.
And like, part of it, I think, is a lot of the scenes where he is an asshole don't happen because the ones that happened before the divergence weren't there, right? Like
the divergence of Scott Pilgrim.
Like, for example, we see him go on quote unquote dates with Knives Chow, who is a 17-year-old Catholic schoolgirl.
I did like the way she looked in this. I love the whole style.
Oh yeah, it's very good. But like, we watched 2 of those dates, and don't get me wrong, Scott, like, even when people ask him, Scott's like, "Oh God, no, we haven't. Like we held hands once." Like, it's like, ugh. But like, he's doing it because he's not over his ex, and like, it's been a while, and like, okay, cool. First of all, rebounding is douchey in general, and B, rebounding with an actual child.
Yeah.
But then he like starts 2-timing Knives and Ramona for a little bit, but that doesn't happen here because there's not time for that to happen here because he dies, or does he? And that's the mystery of the story is.
Well, I feel like this like starts off with him kind of like two-timing. Like he meets Ramona and he just hard goes in on Ramona.
Oh yeah, and that's what happens in quick shout outs. Ramona works at Amazon.ca, which is Canadian Amazon. In Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, she works for Netflix delivering TV.
Yeah.
Which is peak because Kim Pine, Scott's high school girlfriend and current drummer in his band, she works at a DVD place. And when we see her at work in the comic books, she's just at work at a DVD place. But when Ramona comes to visit her in this series, Kim makes a joke about how Netflix is putting them out of business.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, all the comedy was pretty on point. Like, I think every episode made me laugh. But I also love the random inclusions of just like crazy supernatural power shit.
Yeah, and that's just a part of the Scott Pilgrim universe, is that this is a thing that's real.
Like, it's the thing is, like, I didn't remember that at all from the movie. And I don't really know, like, how prevalent is it in the movie? Like, is the whole vegan wormholes?
So there is no vegan portals in the movie, but Todd does have vegan powers, like rays, telekinesis, floating.
I think the vegan powers were definitely, like, the funniest. And I loved how the robot ended up having, like, the ultimate vegan powers because it was a robot.
It's a vegan without the inherent flaws of humanity, one that has never drank milk.
Yeah, no, it's really good.
It's so good. To take a step back, you'd mentioned the art style. The art style is really great. It's not quite one for the comic book, and that's good, right? Because just comic books are comic books, right? They're not animation. But it's so, like, you can tell that it's so, like, the only real variance is what you need in order to make it look good on screen rather than in a book. So, like, if you look at it at first, you're like, damn, this is the comic book. And the only time that I really didn't like it is and like, not like, oh, I really didn't like it, but like the only time that I actually didn't like anything visually is there were bits where when the camera changes focus or like depth of field in a shot, the things on the outside will go blurry as it refocuses onto a new thing. And I just don't like that because it hurts my eyes. It doesn't happen a lot. It happens a couple of times.
Like, what's a good example of like a scene?
I don't remember. When Ramona is fighting Roxy.
Oh yeah,
Roxy
where they were
Richter.
like going to all the like the different crazy like.
What I'm thinking about in particular is there's a bit where they're like across each other, and then it like goes from over the shoulder to like a close up and like. So, what I should say. So, like I was saying earlier, Scott Pilgrim, the comic book, and the movie are the story about a guy moving on with his life. And depending on how you read things, and I definitely think it's the intention, coming to terms with how the life that he is living is impacting the people around him. That being said, Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is about Ramona getting to confront herself in her past because Scott's not around. Because in the events of the story, it's very much a love story. It's very much Scott triumphing to win the girl. And to be fair, in the comic books, there is like a lot of Ramona moments happening off screen or like in passing. But because it's Scott's story, we don't really get into them. But this is... I would like it not to be Ramona's story, but this is Ramona's story, right? Like, realistically, that's what it is. I would have liked to see a little bit more from the surrounding characters, like Kim, for example. I love Kim. Kim is kind of the sleeper main character in the comics.
Oh,
and
really?
That might just be because I simp for her really hard. Ginger drummer girl, come on, man. Who'd probably hate me. Oh.
I love all of the character designs, but like in thinking about how this is kind of like Ramona's story, like it really just feels like a remix kind of in a way. Like it's like, I mean, I don't know. Do you know anything about why? Because Brandon Lee O'Malley like wrote this, right?
So I don't know if he wrote this adaptation, but he was like creative consultant, executive. Like he was step by step, just like in the movie, he was brought through step by step. Like,
I mean, that's cool, yeah. Because I mean, like, I can understand not wanting to just like retell the same story, you know. And I feel like it utilizes all the characters well, and I would say it just gives you. I mean, obviously, since they kind of all go in different directions, like it gives you a different feel than the other ones. Obviously, I can't say for certain because I haven't. I don't have that context, but I guess do you like that it decided to go that direction, or would you have preferred that they just had done like a retelling of the graphic novel?
now what I want is, in addition to this, I want an animated series of the comic. But this is a very good, like, what it does is very good, and I have very few legitimate complaints about it. The only things that do feel a little bit weird is because it's about Ramona confronting her past and her relationship with her exes, and there is still, like, Scott still has to figure his shit out, but we've seen his story twice at this point, probably. So, like, his is a lot more, like, condensed. It's different. Like, it's different, and I'm not going to say the specifics about it until, like, after, like, spoilers off, but, like, because it's Ramona dealing with her shit, we get context about her relationship with her exes, and most of them feel right and good and, like, what they were, but it feels super weird with the direction they took Gideon and Todd in particular. Todd for a different reason than Gideon, but like Gideon is a worse person in the comics and the movie.
Wait, did you say Todd?
No, Gideon.
Gideon. Okay.
Gideon is strictly a worse person in the other adaptations.
I'm just trying to remember which one is Gideon. Is Gideon? Is he the one that takes over the company, or is he the one that gets banished?
He was the one who originally had it all.
Oh, okay.
He's the one who founded the League.
And then who does he start? He starts going by a different name.
By his birth name, Goose.
Oh, that is just his birth name.
Who want so? G-Man watches subs, not dubs, which I think is a very funny note, because if you're watching in English, the bit where he's watching anime is in Japanese. Like, the anime is in Japanese, and I think that's very fun. So, Forrest, would you add this to your list?
Oh, for sure, bro. Like, this was fantastic from start to finish. It's also like a quick watch. Like, it's only 8 episodes. Like, also, when I sat down to watch it, I just like didn't want to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Like, it just keeps you going. It's a very strong story, I think, about just like growth in general. And I don't know how it like ends in the comics, but like I do like that this version of the story kind of is about Ramona kind of reconciling with her past, and I feel like because of it like because Scott came into her life and then was just so abruptly like ripped from her life, I feel like it introduces a really good way to have a character kind of change, because she didn't know Scott for long, but she started to care about him, and then you get these interactions that lead to like everyone kind of bettering themselves in the end. So just like a very strong story with very strong characters. I loved the art direction, and the animation was absolutely fantastic too. Like, there were some really, really good sequences. I probably already know the answer, but what about you, Jack?
Oh yeah, bud. No, this is great, right? Like, coming from this as the perspective of a one step from rabid fan, right? Like, I know for a fact that we have posted episodes of this show where I'm relating shit to Scott Pilgrim. Like,
I
I
know,
know that.
I know you've said it on mic that it's like your favorite thing ever.
It kind of is. And with that in mind, it's super good, right? Like, I'm glad. Like, one of the things that I was interested about is seeing if this holds up to a new viewer experience, like with like limited context. So I am glad that it does, because there's a lot of it that I'm like, ooh, okay. So I'm glad that like it's approachable. But even if you do have like all of these questions about, like, it's so good, and it ends in the place that it needs to, and getting there is fun, and there are moments throughout that, like, every now and then I'm like, huh. And then, like, by the time I'd finished the next episode, it's not like they came up again, but I digested it and I'm like, okay, no, actually, yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, no. Like, it's great. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is it really good? Yeah.
But being perfect is kind of arbitrary sometimes. And I think with this in particular, like, I think it was a great idea to go with a different story, because I mean, it's like virtually impossible to please everyone that is a fan of a particular series when you're doing an anime adaptation. And like, I think it's almost cooler that Scott Pilgrim kind of just has these 3 different iterations of the story, and each one you can kind of experience in its own right, because you still like the movie, right? So it's like the movie's not even like a perfect adaptation of the comics.
Yeah.
And that each one can kind of stand on its own merit is pretty impressive, It's like we remake shit so often these days, shit gets remade all the fucking time, and it's like, what's the point? Like, you could just like take the same ideas and do something cool and interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, no, and the way that it, like, the fact that people get to confront their own problems, and again, I say people, it's Ramona. Ramona gets the opportunity to do things for herself that she should have done for herself. But again, because the other adaptations are Scott's story, it's about Scott doing it, a lot of it. And so it's nice. And like, don't get me wrong, the other adaptations, Ramona definitely like grows, develops, confronts her own things, but this is her story of doing that. My only 2 big complaints is that, well, okay, so Gideon is strictly a worse person in the other versions, because in the movie, he literally puts a mind control chip into the base of Ramona's neck.
Oh, really? Shit.
And that's like why she keeps coming back to him, right?
That's a little messed up.
And in the comic book, he has this weird, like, 7 crystal, like, giant machine where he's entrapping his ex-girl. He has his ex-girlfriends trapped in this machine. One of the purposes of this machine is to create existential dread and self-doubt in Ramona. So, like,
yeah, that's fucked up.
Gideon's up in the other adaptations, but in this one, he's kind of just a guy who's not over Ramona, right? And so having him be this different character, it felt really weird at first, because I'm like, I don't like giving him a redemption. This guy doesn't deserve it. But with the idea that, like, it is a different universe, like,
it's like a different it's a different version of the character.
It was really cool to see Matthew Patel do things, because pretty much all that he does in the original is show up, introduce the concept of the League, get his ass beat by Scott. At first, when he fights Scott in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off, he just one and done punches him, or so we think. And so I was really upset that we weren't going to see his demon hipster chicks, because I love his demon hipster chicks, but they come back and like there were so many moments in the show where I got those happy little hands. where I'm just like, ooh, I feel it. I got so excited that like I felt it physically in so much of my body.
I've been there plenty of times, bro.
Like, oh, so the clash at Demon Head, Black Sheep, right? It had to be in this movie. Or this show. It had to be somewhere.
Wait, what is the Clash at Demon? Which
The clash at Demon Head is Envy Adams, Scott's Big X, her band.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And the song Black Sheep is just like a very like it's how they introduced Todd in the movie, and it's just it's a really good and well composed scene. And it's super hype. And we don't have the full song in the Netflix series because we don't need it, but they had to mention it, right? And the way that they mention it is like a flashback to them in a concert having like the crowd sing the intro. I joined the crowd on my couch. It was so good. Todd is the other character that's okay, that's a lie. Todd and Wallace are the other characters that are changed in a way that I'm not sure I like. Wallace is changed insofar as he's more directly an asshole to Scott.
Wallace is his roommate, right?
Wallace is his cool gay roommate, yes. And granted, like in the comic book, Wallace is like there for Scott while he's like getting back on his feet and everything. And he does ultimately reach the point where he's like, "All right, Scott, buddy, you gotta figure this out." But like from the get-go, he's like pretty vitriolic to Scott sometimes, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, well, calm yourself." And then like later on, he's just his normal snarky like dick self, and I'm like, "All right, that's."
I do like the bit with like the movie that's being made out of the script that he wrote.
Okay, I love so the show references the Scott Pilgrim movie. And all of the characters are talking about how that's a dumb timeline. So young Neil, Stephen Still's roommate, thinks he writes the Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Spoiler alerts, turns out it was a future version of Ramona who went back to like write their story, and what she says is, "I moved some scenes around, combined a few characters, and I had a tight little screenplay." Which is very funny because that is probably what Mr. O'Malley did with the movie. Anyway, so it goes to get made and it falls apart because they cast Lucas Lee as Scott at first. And then they replace him with Todd. And the entire time, Envy Adams is Ramona. And it's such a dumb conceit. But the show's not like presenting it like a, no, this makes sense. It's done for a joke the entire way through. And as a result, it lands the entire way.
And I love all the
way
crazy
through.
shit that happens too, like while they're in the middle of filming.
Oh yeah, it falls apart hard. It's so funny.
Like fucking Wallace, Todd like falling in love with Wallace.
Yeah. Wallace heckles the actor playing him so bad that he gets cast into his own role.
Yeah. I mean, something I was going to ask, is Ramona a vastly different character in this? Like, does she grow and change as much?
It's hard to say because, right, like, there's enough in the comic and in the movie to, like, get a sense for who Ramona is, but she has so much more here than the movie that it's kind of hard to say realistically. I think in general she's pretty true to, like, what it is that she learns about herself and, like, what her journey ends up being. But, I don't know, her relationship with her evil exes are different. They're all kind of toned down. Most noticeably, Gideon and Todd are kind of toned down a lot. But like she and Roxy, all that we really know is that Ramona, in her own words, Ramona has dabbled in being a bitch. And so how many of the, right, like when she's giving us the background, like they all end with her leaving the exes for somebody else. Um, yeah. It's kind of a hard thing to compare, but the lessons and like the way that she grows as a person, I think are very similar. How she does it, the story of that growth is different, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I really need to rewatch and read it.
Todd's an interesting one. Todd's less bad. Todd's not that bad in the movie either, really. But in the comic books, Todd is actively cheating on Envy with their drummer. And has been for who knows how long. And in the comics, and I believe he, like, Ramona in Scott Pilgrim Takes Off mentions that Todd said while they were dating that his true love is in Canada waiting for him. I don't know if that's something that happened in the comic books. It's not something that happens in the movie. I think that part of like the thing about Todd is that he's a cheater. But he's not that way necessarily in Takes Off until
Wallace comes along.
And for a moment, I thought that they weren't going to have Wallace steal a boyfriend. In the rocket during Sex Bob-omb's first concert, Wallace steals Stacy's boyfriend. Stacy being Scott's sister.
Oh, yeah.
And she mentions not again. Which means he's done this before. And so at first I thought, okay, I get it, but it's weird to take that out. And no. He's just going to steal Todd. And I really liked that.
Well, were the twins more of characters? Because I feel like the twins were kind of hardly characters in this. And I loved the little bit where okay, so spoiler alerts, we learn all this shit about the future. We learn that Scott got teleported forward in time and meets himself and all this shit.
Scott in the future is bros with the Kadianaga twins. And he uses their robot's vegan powers because the robot sees all of its existence at the same time to go back to the rocket and steal himself, because in 13 years in the future, after Scott and Ramona got married, they're going through a rough patch, and Wallace made a joke about, oh, well, too bad you don't have a time machine to go back and stop yourself from dating her. Scott is a moron who's running away from his own problems and trying not to take responsibility.
Yeah. Which
is very true to Scott. So what he does is do exactly that. And that's where Scott went.
But I do just I mostly brought that up just because it's funny how the twins become friends with him, and then at the end, or before the final show, they walk in and they see Scott and they're like, oh, we learned that we're bros with you in the future, and then they just keep going.
Yeah, our robot says we're cool, so.
But are they more characters in?
Yes and no. In the comic books, they're around more. They come along during Scott and Ramona's slump and sort of start sowing in more doubt, and that's sort of the angle that they play there. But in the in the movie, they're there for a battle of the bands, get defeated, and that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah. But so we never knew their backstory. Not really. We didn't know that they were effectively grooming Ramona.
Yeah, I guess that is
they are worse.
You do get to learn
the context.
I guess that is more so their characters. You learn that about them.
Yeah. So they were the TAs for Ramona's robotics class freshman year of college. And she mentioned that to them, she was just the new girl, the fresh meat, which implies that they do this every year. Don't get me wrong, even the ones, real creepy, real yikes. But yeah, no. One of the things that I'm glad about, and I was afraid wouldn't happen, is since this isn't really Scott's story, except for when it is, a big part of the comic books is Scott Scott doesn't remember most of college. Or not most. He doesn't remember his last year of college, and there are just big chunks of his life that he remembers differently or doesn't remember at all. It's something that comes up a lot when he's like talking with Kim and when he's talking with Steven Stills, who went to college with him as well, is that Scott doesn't remember these things, or if what he does remember, he remembers differently. And the reason why is because he had jettisoned the memory of him messing up and being a shitty person, and it had sort of formed this like Dark Link version of Scott. And one of the critical parts in both the comic and in the comic, I should say, Dark Scott is in the movie, but as like a joke on the side. In the comics, the big part of it is Scott is fighting and losing himself and losing to himself, and Kim basically goes, "Stop this, grow up." And so at that point, he sort of fuses with Dark Scott and like is confronted with all the shitty things he's done to people.
Interesting. So is Dark Scott in Takes Off like that's basically the equivalent of like the older version of him? Yes. Who's like ripped as shit?
At first I was afraid they weren't going to do it, but then the villain of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is Scott Pilgrim.
I know.
From the future. And I love
great.
that so much. Older Scott is an asshole who, while separated, is like coming up with like this bit, like he's even like getting angry because like Scott's like, okay, or you tell me what we did wrong so I don't do that. And Scott immediately starts yelling at himself, going, "No, I'm a great husband. Why do you assume it was my right?" Because like Scott never grew up.
I do love the way that resolves, like with older Ramona coming in, and then it was like 10 years or some shit, and she was like, you didn't call me for 10 years. He's like, "Oh well, I thought things weren't gonna be good," or I don't even remember what he said.
Like, "I thought things were over," and she's like, "Not at the time." And then like so in the credits, it's old Scott, or it's older Scott and even older Scott. And so even older Scott goes, "Oh, so does that mean we can get back together?" And she's like, "Not after 10 years, dude." So what happens is future Wallace kicks Scott out because Scott's living with Wallace again, obviously. And so older Scott goes back to their shitty old apartment and starts training for 10 years. He doesn't leave the apartment in case Scott goes back and still dates Ramona, which they do. And so he then teleports them all to like a crater and by them all, I mean, it's the whole squad. The whole squad gets to fight with the exception of Scott's friends.
Yeah.
Knives fights.
That whole fight was dope.
No, it like the fight scenes are so good. So good. Like it's just it's so much fun. I love it a lot.
It's crazy because I was trying to think of any negative things that I would have to say about it, and like really it's just like I don't know. I mean, I guess we didn't talk about the voice acting. That's that's the one thing that I feel like we have not talked about at all. Both of us watched the dub, and for those that don't know, the dub of this is done by the cast of the live action movie, and some of it is, not great. Like it's a bunch of people who aren't really voice actors doing voice acting, and it's unfortunate because it's like they could have hired other people, but I do understand the desire to draw in the people that love the movie and be like, look, all the people are returning.
Yeah, I got excited when they made news stories about them coming back. I really did.
And I didn't hate all of them. I mean, like, I think the people that did shine were like Chris Pratt and what?
Chris Pratt?
No, I mean Chris
Chris Pratt?
Evans, the other guy, Chris Evans.
Yeah.
You know, the other
Yeah.
Chris. Yeah, fucking.
Chris Evans.
Yeah. You know, Chris Pratt was also in the Scott Pilgrim movie. Didn't you see him there? He was totally
Whether or
there.
not you should be Mario, whether or not Chris Pratt should be Scott.
And I don't remember her name, who plays Ramona.
Mary Elizabeth Winslet.
Yeah, I think she did pretty
that's
solid.
probably not
And
true.
I won't lie, I think Aubrey Plaza also had some pretty good lines. Like, I mean, she was still playing like the same character she always does, but you know, she didn't do a terrible job. I did love Lucas Lee. He was pretty hilarious all the
Mary
time.
Elizabeth Winstead. Damn.
What did you say?
I said Winslet.
Oh, Winslet. I literally auto-completed to Winstead in my brain, and I didn't even hear that.
It's okay. I know I was wrong. Yeah, and I think part of it also boils down to, I don't know if it was direction or what have you, but the cast are playing their characters the way they played it in the movie, right? Like, it's the same intonation, it's the same, like, character. But the ways that that these characters are talking to each other and like what they're doing sort of makes them feel like they're slightly different, right? So like Kim, I think, is a good example of this. Kim Pine in the movie doesn't get enough time. Not even kind of. It's a shame how little Kim is in the movie, especially considering how much she gets to grow and how many realizations that she gets in the comics. But as a result, like, the way that she's played by Alison Pill, oh my God, love Alison Pill, but the way that she's played works and it's very good. But Kim's talking a lot more and a lot more like sort of positive emotions, because like she's smirking, she's smiling, she's like throwing out winks while she's saying shit, but it's always said in sort of this like detached, not even too cool to care, but more of like a really sort of voice, because that's the Kim of the movie. And largely that's the Kim of the comic books as well. But it's not befitting the animation, right? I actually watched this twice because it is so short and I love it so much. And I watched some scenes in Japanese as well. And the Japanese VAs are definitely putting a much different spin on it, right? Like, you can tell intonation even if you don't speak the language, right? Like, it's a lot more emotive, partially again because they're professional voice actors, and partially it's just like that's the character as they're being presented, not the character as they were, right?
Well, and whether or not it's a debate, I don't know. I literally don't pay attention to shit like that on the internet, but this is like for certain a Japanese anime, and you know, I think the dub did a really solid job, you know, because usually the problem with dubs is that they kind of, you know, have to, you know, either match like the lip flaps of like the Japanese voice acting, which can lead to odd, you know, deliveries and weird timing. But like this definitely feels like the English script was written really well, and like I think all of the lines felt pretty natural, because that's kind of the problem with dubs usually, is that they don't feel natural. I would love to watch it in Japanese, because I mean, like, just Japanese voice actors just go crazy.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if this was written in English first.
Yeah, I mean, it totally could have been.
Given like the source material, you'd mentioned that, like, you know, whether or not there's a debate as to whether or not this counts as anime. When you said that you wanted to do it for the podcast, I was afraid about it, right? Because I thought it was a Western animation, and then you were telling me about how it was basically the only thing Western about it really is the source material.
I mean, it is dope. I was trying to see like what studio did it, but I think it's basically being credited to Netflix. Like, it's not like, because like there's some anime that are put onto Netflix that, you know, are done by studios like Trigger. You know, like Dungeon Meshi currently is being aired to Netflix, but it is a Studio Trigger anime. I think this was like 100% financed by Netflix. So like it's like I think they basically probably just hired Japanese animators. God damn, dude. There's like so many executive producers on this shit. And it's not even directed by a Japanese person. Someone named Abel Gongora, Spanish animator and director, known for his work with the Japanese animation studio Science Saru. Interesting. Okay. But yeah, no, it was really good. I mean, I wasn't expecting it to be bad, you know. Like I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised that it was especially good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fun that this is a franchise that has strictly has 3 good pieces of media.
Yeah. Well, any other thoughts?
No, not really. Read Brian Lee O'Malley's other comics as well.
Oh yeah, how many comics does he have? Like,
So I'm aware of 3 of them, but I believe he's made another recently. Or at least there are 3 big ones. One of which is about your first post high school road trip with your friends, and there's still sort of like fantastical elements about it. The other one is Scott Pilgrim, and then the other one that's a little bit different because it's just for like being a little bit later in your life is called Seconds, and it's the one that I really, really, really wish I had. Don't get me wrong, the other one is good, but it's about a part of life that I'm far enough removed from that I have a hard time going back to. Seconds is very good. It's about why you shouldn't get stuck in wishing that you did something different. Very trippy, super trippy towards the end, and I love it.
sounds really good.
And then the other one that I'm aware of is called Snot Girl, which is
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
it's good. He's like
He doesn't draw that one.
No, he doesn't draw it. And it's about. Have you ever seen Perfect Blue or
Yeah.
Paprika?
Yeah.
It's a very similar kind of vibe, but Instagrammer sort of.
Yeah, no, I should definitely read that stuff. I do like that his I feel like his concepts are very rooted in like specific specific themes, but also, you know, focusing on things that are real experiences and like having that being like a driving force in a story. It just feels very conceptual, which I like, you know.
Yeah, it's very good. I will say something that we didn't touch on is the music.
Oh yeah, I mean the music was also fantastic.
The music's fantastic. I like it a lot. I am a little upset that we didn't get more Sex Bomb originals. But
Yeah, I feel like they were kind of absent.
Scott was gone for 2/3 of the show, so it makes sense. But God, what we get is so good, and I really like that we're drawing on more like well-known covers or well-known like popular songs from the era or like from like sort of the subculture that like Scott and Ramona and like this like the originals that they like or like the songs that they got the rights to and that they used fit the tone and just like the oeuvre of like the people that the characters are so well. And I like it a lot. It's a sort of kind of a different vibe, but also not really, right? Like the people who like the music that was played here are the same people who like the music that are played in, say, the movie, right? Even though the movie's a little bit more grunge, a little bit more like folk punkish, sort of like I don't know if this is apocryphal, but somebody told me that like Beck was the guy who was in charge of like the music design for like the writing the originals for the movie.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I'm gonna look that up, and if it's not true, I'm gonna cut it. Yeah. So Beck wrote some of the songs for it. That's what it is. Beck was on the song. Okay, so I'll just cut out the pause. There's a very good use of My United States of Whatever. Or Whatever by United States of Liam or whatever.
Is that in this?
Whatever.
Is that in this?
So then I was talking to Kiki, that song.
It's not ringing a bell for some reason.
Oh, it's in Lucas Lee's episode where he's skateboarding
Okay.
around, just being
Okay.
kind of a degenerate at
Yeah,
first.
yeah. Oh yeah, I was gonna say I loved how he like ended up just at the coffee shop.
Yeah, he ended up being the hot priest. Okay. So Lucas Lee's God's gift to everything. Like in the comics and in the movie, he's kind of like, in the movie he's more of a douche than he is in the comics. But in the comics, legitimately what happens in the comics is he's like, all right, bro, we're fighting. Meet me here. He's sitting there smoking, reading. Scott rolls up and he's like, okay, cool. And just knocks Scott out. And then Scott wakes up and he's like, all right, so let's sit and talk. I got Gatorade and baby carrots. Like, and so they talk, they eat, they snack. He fills Scott in because Scott didn't read Matthew Patel's letter explaining the situation. And he's like, all right, brother, if you just give up on Ramona, like, give me your money. I'll tell Gideon you beat me up. And then in the movie, he's doing the whole, like, film scene and what have you. He definitely grinds to his death both times. Scott, like, baits him into, like, hey.
Doing a sick grind.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And he goes, no, there's like 200 steps and the rails are garbage. And in the movie, Scott goes, there are girls watching. Somebody bring me my board.
Does he say whatever that much in the years?
No, but that's kind of like an affectation of like this sort of like bad boy, devil may care. Like he just doesn't have as much screen time because he dies. All of the exes get to be more of characters, with the exception of the Kadianagi twins. Matthew Patel, you know, he died in like 2 minutes of screen time originally. So like he shows up, fights Scott, dies, and is
That's wild.
so like, and in this one he's like kind of like the secondary antagonist. Like he's a lot. There was a moment there's something. Oh, the one thing that I don't. So 2 moments that I really like with Lucas Lee is they make a very good point of not saying he got canceled. They talk about how his career's over because the media is talking about how he's dating the actress who plays Knives, and Knives is 17. But what Lucas says is, but the actress is 31. Right? Like she's 31 in real life. So like it was the straw that broke the camel's back with him being just a shithead. But it was one of those like, all right. But so as they're leaving, he goes, it's like I'm a show that's not on the air anymore. If only there was a word for it. Like they refused to have Lucas Lee say that he got canceled.
Yeah, that's good.
Which is so good. Man, it's just, I don't know if I have any, like, what I just said isn't like breathtaking commentary or analysis. Now at this point, I'm just basking in how much I like the show. Right? Like, I think I said all the salient points that I was gonna say, but God, it's so good.
Go watch it.
It's so good. Phil Forrest. I don't use social media, but you do.
Yeah, unfortunately I do. Every time I go on it, I'm like, why am I on this? But I make music under the name Bustelo. You can check it out on YouTube, on Bandcamp. You can find all of my projects through YouTube, and I guess if you want to follow me on social media, I do have a Twitter and an Instagram, but God, I hate social media.
Did they finalize the Twitter is now X thing? Or have people just given up not calling it X?
I will never call it X. It is X, I guess. Whatever.
Fair. All right.
Goodbye.
Bye.